Hi chaps. I'm super sorry about that. I was traveling and my battery ran out of my phone, and would you believe not a single person allowed me to have a call. So, Charlemagne, I apologize. I've put the link in the chat if you'd like to jump on. I can't believe I've been that tardy. Good Lord, 20 minutes late. Almost half an hour. At least some people waited. Let's have a little wait. Let's get this ready. I know. I'm going to get in the neck from people about this. Thanks for that, Wes. Did we lose Charlemagne? Is he still around? Or do we have to reschedule? Here he comes. And finally, hello, Charlemagne.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm so sorry. I went to see my sister and the children, and my phone ran out of battery, and I've been trying to race across London. And, and not a single person. It's amazing how kind people aren't anymore, isn't it? I was
Oh, you
desperate.
couldn't find anyone to help you charge your phone?
Yeah, could you just give me a charge or call or some way to just use Twitter or anything? And people have their masks on in London and they just step away. Like they
Oh,
look at
God.
you like you're going to. I'm terribly sorry about this, my man. So, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. No problem. I'm just here at my workstation, enjoying the Saturday morning.
All right, were you entertaining the chat on my behalf, so doing work for the others?
Yeah, keeping them entertained in the
Oh.
meantime.
Well, anyway, guys, finally, this is I must say, I'm terribly excited about this stream. I've been a huge fan of your Charlemagne over the last few years. I've been watching your videos and other neo-reactionaries. And like I said to you yesterday, I think you've got quite a fan base in the UK that you may not be aware of. So I'm sure at some point they'll all watch this video too. So,
Thanks. Yeah, I do know I have a lot of UK fans, but maybe the audience there is bigger than I had realized.
all right, yeah. So maybe if you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself. Obviously, I know who you are, and maybe if those who haven't heard you yet. So.
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel. I've been making mostly neo-reactionary content for the past 2 or 3 years. The channel is significantly older than that, but it shifted in the neo-reactionary direction after the 2016 election in the U.S. and also Brexit. And I had happened to read Moldbug's open letter in 2017, I think, and that fundamentally shifted my approach to my understanding of how government worked in the West. And I found that content so interesting, I wanted to share it with people, which is basically the channel mission, is to get these neo-reactionary ideas out to more people, just because they had such a profound effect on me.
Ah, wonderful. So you say you came to Morbog a few years ago, 3 or 4 years, or 2016, was it? Just
Yeah,
before.
2016, 2017, something like that. I
Right.
think it was 17.
Hmm. So was that anything to do with the fact that you saw Trump 2016 was super polarizing, right? I remember the campaign was in 2015 and 14.
Yeah, well, you and I are both programmers, I think, and I'm always looking. When I look at the what happened with Trump, I'm looking at the system, and the system's not really working the way it's supposed to. And I'm sort of looking for. I'm trying to debug it, right? I'm looking for some sort of explanation to what is just going on in Western politics, because none of the stories that we have that should explain Trump and all the hysteria around him made any sense to me. And the same for Brexit. So Moldbug I found really intriguing, just because he actually provided salient explanations for what was happening. And so one of the things I did in my earlier videos was I mapped Moldbug's ideas onto what was going on in mostly US politics at the
Right.
time. And I actually started before the stream I did with Sargon a few days ago. I rewatched some of my earlier videos, and I can see why people really like them, because I found some of the points still really salient. Which is one of the reasons why I like Moldbug so much, because I feel like his analysis has really stood the test of time are really the test of reality. Like as someone trained as an engineer, I'm always looking to see if theory actually has predictive and explanatory power when it hits the road. And Moldbug's analysis of the cathedral certainly does.
It absolutely. I come from a similar background. So are you a software developer, by training as well, right? Is that your
Yep.
career?
So, yep, I went to university for software engineering.
Okay, brilliant, excellent. Yeah, so I mean, I have a similar kind of tale because I came into this stuff perhaps a lot earlier than you. So I lived in California for 7 years in the Bay Area, and this is when I first met Morbog actually. But it was nothing to do with politics. It was to write a ubiquitous OS and problems with distributed OSs and stuff well ahead of itself because we saw the dot-com boom, and we were looking at things like the BSD kernel and everything else. We're saying this stuff is never going to scale. Could it scale? And you probably know by now that we're running highly scaling computing on OSs, of which 90% of the code is never invoked, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, so the majority of the scaling software, especially for large scale clusters, you think if you run like OS level metrics, you go, wow, large parts of the OS themselves are not invoked. So we started looking at patterns and stuff like that. And that was my kind of injection. And then I worked on the first semantic web at Stanford under Berners-Lee and other people. And we ingested all the PubMed articles, 1.9 million of them. So that was basically all top tier one, tier two scientific journals. And then we built ontologies of all of them. And then we did ontological graph queries. So we wanted to support the US Defense Agency doing things like real-time surgery in the field, that kind of stuff. And we found about 30% of them had like ontological or logical inconsistencies. They basically violated first order, second order predicate logic. They violated all sorts of stuff. And we were looking, wow, so if hardcore sciences with peer-reviewed journals were inconsistent, for lack of a better word, obviously economics, politics were miles off, right? So, if you couldn't even get like science journals, like physics, for example, to be shown to be consistent in academia, then, what would we expect stuff like economics to? So that was my kind of entry into it. And that was pretty much after 9/11. So I remember the day I woke up for 9/11 happened at 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, California time. And, I don't have to tell you about how the US felt the day after, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, it was like, wow, this whole world is not right. Something is not right, right? That kind of like pre-pill kind of moment where you go,
Yeah.
yeah, something's not right. And, I'm a geek. I started programming as a kid. And you're like, there's just, this stuff is just not right. And, as an engineer, you get that feeling inside you, like the
Yes.
inner human bug. You're like, I don't know what this thing is, but I need to get to the bottom of it, right? I'm not going to
Yeah.
sleep until I know what's right, right?
Yeah, I know
So
that feeling very well.
yeah,
For me, I think we probably all remembered that moment. For me, it was actually the Nice attacks in France. I think in 2015, if you remember that big massacre at a theater. Because up until that point, I had been trained on progressive liberal ideology, but as an engineer, I couldn't not see the inconsistencies in the logic that was working. And this is the kind of thing that will just eat at you until you solve it, and you're fundamentally motivated to find the solution to the problem, which is how I ultimately ended up at NeoReaction like 2 years later.
yeah, and it's amazing because I mean, like I said, my chats with Curtis were all about very technical stuff, a bit political, but it was all about like because Bill Joy was lurking around. You probably know who that is, right? The guy who created the BSD kernel, Unix, Java, Sun. And he was also like rambling and ranting about OSs, and we were looking, going like, right. And then I got dragged into a lecture, which I think I told that story yesterday with Robert Conquest, and it's a kind of favorite story of mine. And we were out to have a few drinks, shall we say. And one of our mates said, "You've got to listen to this historian. You have to listen to him." And we were like, "Historians, don't waste our time, right?" And then I just sat there in complete amazement looking at this chap, and he was so lucid. He was quite old at the time. But and we're just sitting there listening to it, going like, these patterns make absolute sense. This chap just is like a pattern seeing machine. And we're looking at this and we're like, wow. And then it took years for me, over a decade later, to go, gosh, this historian has stumbled upon entropy as the fundamental problem here, right? Yeah, we're like, after that, my respect for historians changed completely. I was like, okay, they're not just scribes, right? They're a little bit more than scribes. So So yeah, so I mean, so what's your? I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions because I'm dead curious. I haven't been to the US for a couple of years now, but I'll be going to LA hopefully soon, the end of the year or next year. What is the state of play? Would you say with the NRx hat in the US? Is it what we expect to see? The Democrats are just going to keep running riot and until they push it over the cliff, if you like. Is that a good assessment? Or
Yeah, so I just reread the open letter recently, and one of the things Moldbug mentioned in it was basically there's this one little line in there that when the inner party goes crazy, then you should get really scared, basically. And I think that is exactly what we're seeing. And we're basically seeing the Democrats support a sort of internal insurgency against the US government as part of their political arm. So what we're seeing with Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all these other protest groups, whoever they are, even all the way up till militias, these groups actually support the Democratic politicians and to some extent the Republicans, obviously, and they mutually assist each other. And I'm worried about this snowballing in a sort of a runaway process. That's because it's not really under anyone's control. The Democrats can't actually control what the protesters do down to an individual level, but nevertheless, they're going to keep pumping support into them. So I expect we see the inner party become madder and madder in the next couple of years, and I think probably by 2025 or 2024, we'll reach the crux moment where the solution to the crisis sort of presents itself. I think you mentioned that year on your last stream with Renew Britannia. We do need to be focusing, I think, very much on what we can do in the short term, because I think what we're seeing is really starting to come to a head. And although it might seem like we're in for decades and decades of oppression, I see an accelerating process happening, and I think it's going to reach its conclusion at a much faster rate than anyone really sees coming.
I actually I'm tempted to agree because I was wondering what that would manifest itself as, and I thought what would be the ultimate holy grail that they would go against. I mean, because I follow U.S. politics, I've got tons of American mates or buddies, if you like, and I was looking and thinking, at some point they're going to have to go to the Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I now hear for the first time in my life, and I think I first lived in the States in the late '80s and mid late '80s, and I finally, for the first time in history, I'm seeing people actually being quite serious about things like challenging the legitimacy of the Second or the First. And you think the idea of challenging the legitimacy of the First and Second Amendments, if you asked me 20 years ago, 10 years ago, if that was real, I would have thought people would make noise about it, but it would never be legitimate. And I look at it and think, could they possibly go after either one of those two, guns or free speech? Right? I mean, and it looks like they could ultimately get a supermajority where they could potentially just pass legislation that amends it, right? Or literally just gets rid of it altogether, right?
Yeah, this is
And
actually something I looked into the other day. It's kind of scarily easy to actually just completely overturn the U.S. Constitution. It takes, depending on the specific process, it takes 2/3 and 3/4 majorities in the states or the Congress, which is really not that much if you consider the way things are moving. I mean, I could definitely see in the next few decades a complete rewrite of the Constitution happening, and legally there would be nothing you could do about that because it's a completely legal process that can take place.
right, that's the thing that's terrifying, isn't it? They could actually get a sufficient majority in what I like to call, like, it's almost it's like the momentum effect, isn't it? They even your sort of kind of, I guess, milk toast type of Republicans would probably just go with the herd, right? Even though their instincts would be to defend. You'd expect the red states to defend the second. They might just go with peer pressure, right? They might just go, right, there's enough black chaps running around with guns. Let's just get rid of all the guns, right? Which would be absurd, but that's I think that might happen in my lifetime is something that's quite unnerving, right? Or
Yeah,
I don't know.
I would not be surprised to see it. And we kind of think of the Constitutional Convention as like a right-wing solution to the current problems in American democracy, but it would obviously not go that way. I think the specific way it works, if I recall, Congress can amend the Constitution, I think, with a 2/3 majority in both houses, and then the sign off by the president, and then the Constitutional Convention, I believe, is convened by 3/4 of the states, and then 2/3 must agree on the particulars of the amendments. It's something within those ratios, but it's I think it takes 39 states, if I recall, to start the convention, which is a good number, but not completely out of the box, right? So we're getting to the point where this could actually happen. But another thing is, though, is as you mentioned the First Amendment, one of the things people forget is that the First Amendment guarantees several things, not just free speech. It also guarantees the right to peaceably assemble, which at basically every level of government has been completely overturned at this point, because in the U.S. we don't have as stringent of lockdown orders as in Great Britain, but absolutely that right to assemble is just completely ignored, and people seem to not care at all, honestly, about it.
And do you think that's because they've accelerated the indoctrination at the school level and stuff? Is it literally are there any schools left in like the Rust Belt Midwest? Is any school left in like St. Louis or anywhere that's immune now, or is it only private education that saves American kids from the indoctrination? So
yeah, I think the schools are pretty corrupt. I talked to some younger people, and from what I can tell, it's a complete disaster zone. I mean, even when I was educated, it's a far cry from the kind of education you would have received. One of the things I've noticed is that people used to be educated in like a logical paradigm of thinking, and I think that's why you're able to see these ontological contradictions in logic, whereas even someone like myself is educated to that degree to a far less extent. And then now you're not educated in this way anymore. People are only educated pseudo-scientifically and based on some very base empirical observations. Like whenever I get into discussions with people, they're sort of totally incapable from actually deriving ideas from sort of logical first principles. They're only able to look at a certain set of apparent truths that they get from scientists and just sort of accept the conclusions, and they can't really think all the way from the first principles. And that's a huge problem that we have in society as a whole. I think that's sort of the root of the educational problems, is people not being trained to think from logical principles.
I couldn't but agree more. I was very fortunate. I went to a very, let's just say my high school was 500 years old, and we were taught, first of all, I mean, I remember doing even let's say our mathematics in we have a different school system to each apps, but even my last 2 years, we sit a paper at 18, or we sit our exams at 18, and we only have to take, like, in my case, it was only 8 questions in the paper that gets you into university. And firstly, my maths teacher, even in maths, said, forget about the exams, forget about the questions. We're going to talk about certain principles. So if it was something like, say, projectile problems, he said, don't worry about any projectile problem. All these projectile problems are going to be variants of the following 3 foundational equations. We're just going to spend a month or 2 talking about the foundational equations, and you'll see that exam papers are trivial. They're just derivative. As opposed to now, so that's a great example. I was used as foundational principles first, right? If I was teaching someone to code or teaching someone how to program, I wouldn't teach them how to write code. I teach them principles first, right? Mm-hmm. I'd be like, okay, that's a data structure. That's what. Forget about the utilitarian value of it. I'll just teach you what the thing is in of itself, and you later find that things are just. But now you're right. I guess people are just being, the hey, Newton was a racist. Forget Principia Mathematica. We start with Newton was a racist, so let's take everything he said with a pinch of salt, right?
Yeah, so, well, now it's even worse because you're starting there. At least when I was educated, I took some physics class in college, and at least we learned how to solve the problems, right? We didn't go back to first principles, but we at least learned, how to apply the solutions to these formulas. So we didn't start where you had mentioned talking about the foundation itself, but we at least did some useful work. And then in engineering specifically, I was taught from these sort of abstract notions first over just learning to code. But we're continuing to move down the path where people aren't exposed to any of this in any field, and eventually it's going to overcome STEM as well. And
that's what I'm terrified about the US. I think the UK may be slightly different with STEM, but the STEM thing terrifies me as well, because I'm sure you're aware of the replication crisis now, right? It's just absurd. I mean, all the hard sciences, to those in the chat, the estimated replication rate for a study is how you test the legitimacy of it in science, right? Imagine the scientific process, and that is just falling and falling. And certain areas, obviously things like genetics and other things, are just no-goes, right? So you've got the cathedral working by not funding attacking scientists, saying that subject area is off limits. And then, no surprise, you see this kind of quality of the core of the West being assaulted from within, which I find, I mean, I'll be honest, I use emotive language. I feel repulsed inside, right? I feel angry. I feel all these emotive reactions because I think of it as, it's almost like sacred, like God's laws. And here's someone tinkering with it, saying, don't look at the laws correctly, right? As opposed to just roll back a few centuries. And it was a Christian spiritual religious duty to be pursuing the truth, right? It wasn't just a truth for itself. There was that incorruptibility of science and the church linked together. Now it looks like, I remember, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, there was that, I'm not sure if you recall, that decolonizing science movement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was some, I remember watching some South African kid in a university or something in South Africa just explaining why science and Western science was completely colonized, and, African science was equally legitimate as Western science. So yeah, that's quite terrifying. So what would you say that if there was a beacon of hope? I'm sorry, I'm asking probably more questions than the other way around, but what would you say this hope is in the US? Would it be some form of secession, or is there something you see as an alternative to disaster? Or
I think probably the best possible outcome from my view is a sort of return to a federalist United States where you have powers decentralize themselves back to the state level, sort of like a patchwork system you might imagine. And the states might be able to implement solutions to their problems at a more localized scale. And maybe from that, we might evolve back into a better version of the United States. That's like I don't necessarily think that's very likely. That would be the best case I could see realistically happening. I think probably more likely is either a much more, so I guess this isn't really a positive, but I think the bad way things are going to go is the federal government is just going to take more and more power for itself and basically eradicate the entire concepts of states having any independence whatsoever. I think for the right, decentralization is the way to go, and that could include outright separation and secession, which wouldn't be the worst outcome. But I think it would be better for us if we could actually preserve the union in some fashion, because I think we want this power structure to be in the hands of pronomians, basically. And if we can secede with a few states and create a sort of right-wing enclave, that would be good, but it certainly wouldn't be my first choice, just because that would put you in a very weakened position.
No, I feel quite, I mean, it's an odd thing to say if someone's not an American at all, but I have a very, very deep fondness for the American people, at least the real American people. And it would break my heart to see a secession or separation. It really would. It would feel like one of this something great was lost in human culture. But I like the idea of potentially if some states could hold firm and you had some sort of relocalization of power, right? Like states' rights really becomes the only thing that holds it at bay. That perhaps some of the states maintain a semblance of America and become places people don't want to live, shall we say? And then the rest becomes California and Texas and Baltimore or something, right?
Exactly. The problem with this, though, is that it's really difficult to draw any lines by the state lines that actually form any sort of coherent country. The only places this is really possible, especially from a right-wing perspective, is in what we call the American Redoubt, which is basically all of the area in the northwest of the country, the very like Montana, Idaho, most of Washington and Oregon, that area. But everywhere else, particularly here in the South, you can't really divide into coherent nations purely on state lines. So we almost need some sort of division at that level at this point, even in order for something like that to even work.
And it's not because I was going to ask you this question. I've asked a few Americans this recently because I've noticed, I'm not sure how it's working right now in the States, is that there's a definite pattern of distribution of incoming migrants. So there's a natural affinity for migrants to, when they first arrive, to go where their own are. And then there seems to be a very strong, almost a subterfuge or a sabotage of the left that then decides to ship them around the place. So I'm wondering if that's happening in the States, because you'd expect there might be a local effect of, say, Hispanic migration to, Florida, Miami, and, the southern states. But then I hear stories of my friends saying, hey, suddenly there's all these Mexicans arriving in like Idaho. And I would have thought Idaho is fairly white, right? You're like, how did they get to Idaho? What about all the states in between? What made them select Idaho, right? Why are they in Montana, right? So I'm wondering if there's any kind of attempt, or have you noticed any patterns where they kind of there's a kind of either explicit or some other mechanism of moving people, because the Democrats are very good at shipping people, right? They like the busing idea, isn't it? It's almost in their ethos that we should move people where they're not wanted, right? It's
Yeah, I think this is mostly accomplished just through the homogenizing nature of American cities. You know, basically every state has a city that looks exactly like any other city in the country in it, with just this homogenized hodgepodge culture where just everyone's thrown in, and what you get is just sort of this metastasizing factor where that just spreads to the rest of the state, and eventually the whole thing is just kind of mixed together. So the Northwest is sort of the last holdout, I guess, of more traditional Americans. But if you take the South, for example, and I think this is one of the reasons why you don't see any sort of real neo-Confederate movement, is because there is no coherent South left geographically. It's all just been mixed together, and we've done this mostly ourselves. I mean, we took in our own migrants hundreds of years ago, right? Whereas this is more of a new problem for Britain, but this process has gone on in the United States for hundreds of years at this point, to the point where we're totally mixed up.
Yeah, I noticed the patterns myself, because I'd been to Texas many times, but not for a long time. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I was there 10 or 15 times in a couple of years for work in both Houston and Dallas. And I noticed that pattern you're speaking about. You get this kind of inner city core that is, what's the word I should use, vibrant and diverse. Then I went out to my friends' houses, and they were just pretty much like a white circle around, right, of the
Yeah.
burbs. And then there were poorer people approaching from the outer circle, and the chap said, "Look, I've got to get my kids to high school, and then I'm fleeing. Right? We might have another 4 or 5 years of high school, and then there's nowhere to go. I can't go into the city. If I go out, it's pretty much like a fair jump, a couple of hops away to run away, right? And it seems like that pattern holds, right? And then you look at cities. Right? I went back to where was it, Detroit. And Detroit is just, I mean, it could be a war zone for all you care, right? There's this kind of inner core of the city, and then there's nothing, right? There's just areas you can drive for 20 blocks, and you just look around going, wow, is this really still the United States? And then you get to areas that are very red, to use euphemisms, right? Again. So yeah, which is quite, so it's really. And how do you think is the NRx movement in the States going? Because obviously Curtis has popped up again out of the blue, right? And he's now got a little bit of a traction going. So he's obviously with Peter Thiel and stuff. So the rumor is that there's enough NRx people now in the White House making noise. So I'm not sure how that helps us. If it's
I'm pretty skeptical about that sort of thing. I honestly, from my perspective, NRX seems a lot more successful in Great Britain than in the United States. I don't know if that is a factor of scale. Our government is so vast and opaque. It's very difficult to really get an understanding of to what degree this very particular ideology is actually influencing people. And at this point, Trump's regime has been just completely ground down into powder at this point. So I don't really see neo-reaction having much influence at that level, unless we're surprised if he gets reelected and maybe there's some surprises thrown our way. Okay, I'm always, we're not going to rule that out, but unfortunately, I don't think neo-reaction has much pull in the US at any significant level at this point.
No, I think I can see what you mean because of the scale. Whereas in England, I know particularly there's probably like 8 people who are, basically he's hired a lot of quants from the city. So basically a lot of number crunching chaps, and most of them are NRX heads. And in England particularly, the Conservative Party just survived 3 scares in the last 5 years, like real scares. They literally thought the party would split. So the kind of main chap here is called Dominic Cummings. I'm not sure if you know, he's the brains behind the Conservative Party, and he is number crunching his way. And what he's doing now is, for the first time in the history of the Conservative Party, he is appeasing Islam. Right? They are literally running the largest Islamophobic inquiry into the Conservative Party. So he realized that the data in the UK is that a seat goes left when it hits 30% non-native.
Hmm.
And so his thing is, where do I get my non-natives? So, well, Muslims are conservative, not the kind of conservative you may like to see, but they are terribly right-wing people. And the LGBTQ fault lines here and everything has the Conservative Party looking at this model going, do we have some sort of hope? So they're NRx people in Downing Street. So, or at least in Conservative Party HQ. So I think the European story is different because, yeah, of course it is the density, the scale, the history, right? But if the US falls, I think it'll be more than a cold we catch in Europe, right? I think it'll be quite horrid. So
Hmm.
because you think the Anglospheric bond is still quite strong in a certain way. So if that goes, I'm not sure where England goes, right? So it's quite.
Yeah, I think our destinies are very linked together, and we'll probably end up going down the same path. It's difficult for me to imagine the various Anglo countries taking drastically different paths in terms of what the outcome of all this is. So we do have a shared interest there at that level. Weirdly, I'm not even the best person to ask on this. I think I do know some neo-reactionary Americans, but I associate mostly with British and European people, just in who I hang out with online for the most part. There's like I don't know what it is, but most of the interesting people, I guess, in our sphere seem to be from Britain or otherwise, and not really in the United States so much. I mean, here we have Settlers Lament in Canada, and then the Distributist over on the West Coast, and I'm kind of blanking already. Endeavor in Canada also, but
Yeah.
most of the interesting stuff seems to be happening in the UK, honestly, and I
And
spend
without
most of
dogs,
my time there.
and without doxing yourself, are you in the middle of the states? Or are you
Oh, I'm
close
in the
to?
South.
Yeah, the south. Okay, wow.
Yeah,
Okay, so
which
yeah,
is
so do you?
disappointing because there's no one else around me.
Oh no,
you know,
I know that feeling actually. There's a sort of you get these areas where you think there may be an intellectual vacuum, or do you know what I mean? The US has that strange effect, right, where you suddenly find all these like-minded minds, and then you go to certain areas, you go, wow, I can't meet anyone in real life who's like me or I can speak to, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, I remember that phenomenon because I spent in my kind of like crazy kind of intellectual journey when I lived in the US. I had the luxury of a few years chasing some of my heroes, and I spent a couple of summers in Ann Arbor, in Michigan, and where Robert Axelrod, and John Holland were. And I remember the absurdity of speaking to people like John Holland and Axelrod at Ann Arbor, and then going out into the woods with these guys called the Michigan Militia. Do you know who they are?
No.
Yeah. Oh my God. These guys were, I mean, wow. They were like anti federalist, gun toting people because I happened to like one of the guys I met in a bar once. And I remember spending camping nights with these guys going, look, we've got all these weapons because we're going to take out the federal government. I'm sitting there, it's very hard to explain for non-Americans. It's like, the presence of guns makes Europeans go, hang on a second, here I am with this chap and a gun. And I'm like, we don't have guns here, right? So that your instinct is like, why am I in a situation where law enforcement shows up? And I'm like, yeah, all those weapons. And these chaps didn't just have like a pistol; they had like serious, I like to say, artillery. They had a lot of weapons, and they literally thought that, right, if it all goes wrong, here's where we hold up. And I look back and that was 98 or something, 97. I think, wow, and I look back and think there was a certain prescience of these people, right? They might be a bit nutty, but you can imagine why they thought what they did, right? They never really trusted the government, right? They never trusted the federal government. So it's quite, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know what's ahead. I don't know if you have any questions on the European side. Our politics here is quite intense at the moment, right? We have, France is almost burning. And you're seeing the polarity coming back in full extreme because I would have never thought in my lifetime that Marine Le Pen is almost neck and neck in the polls, right? And
Hmm.
she's putting down hardcore policies, and she's still kind of, almost neck and neck, waiting for the French presidential election. And she's put deportation on her platform of policies. So you can see that the polarity is really screaming in France. Sweden is a mess because I have one of my best friends is Swedish, and Sweden is absurd. You have this almost suspended state of ordinary Swedes who just sit there like comatose while people are throwing grenades at police stations, raping girls in staircases, and the rest of the polity just seems. I don't know what the word is if in Sweden. They seem numbed to it, right? They seem almost like incapable of accepting what's happening. even the Swedish police males and stuff are just going, my good friend, his close friend is a policeman. He says, yeah, we know the Somalis are throwing grenades, but hey, what can you do? Right? You're like, so there's this kind of almost suspension of belief, right? And for me, I look at those patterns and I think, gosh, these look like traditionally patterns prior to conflict. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what alarms me. I have two young children. I think conflict is not what I want to see resolve this, right? I want to see if there's any way we can use geeks, especially we can use tech, we can use our brains, we can use something to either stop the rot or mount a rearguard defense or do something. And the only thing I can offer other than big ears usually is, I've got some kind of techie skills. So I'm looking at trying to see what we can do in England for that. Otherwise, it's looking pretty dire here. We don't have the same situation as the US, but the flood is very, very serious here because we have a very hardcore white left, right? They are. I mean, I don't know if you saw images of Black Lives Matter in England, but they're as zealous as Cortez or anyone else over here. They literally believe that that the black people are being oppressed by police over here. And it's just not the case. It's not the same as the US. I've lived in both places long enough, right? But you've got this kind of, they're almost, I don't know the word I'd like to use, they're bloodthirsty, really, right?
Mm.
It's almost like they're on a mission of vengeance. When you speak to some of them, they're very, very committed to winning. And that's the thing that alarms me. Whereas on the right, I'm not sure if you agree, if you go into any of our groups, our Telegram channels, at least 50-60% of the energy is spent in infighting.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, they're just screaming at each other. I'm a National Socialist. I'm not. I'm a fascist. I'm telling you, Mussolini was right. Mussolini was wrong. And you're like, guys, the problem is not some purity spiral of National Socialism. It's not going to help save the day, right? I'm not sure about the States, but do you feel the same way? Do you feel the right are infighting a lot in the States? Or?
Oh, oh yeah, we spend a lot of time in fighting as well, pretty much just as much as in the UK and otherwise. If you go into the Discord servers and stuff, I do think there is some advantage in Europe in terms of responding to this stuff just due to the scales. One of the problems in the United States is if you live in or close to the cities, you see these problems. But then, there's a guy 2,000 miles away living in the middle of the woods in Montana or something who's just living a totally normal, traditional American life. And it's going to be possible to do that for decades and decades, probably in the US, and then just sort of live your own way. Whereas, in the UK, everything's much closer together. You can't really flee anywhere at this point. And I think that can actually work to your advantage in terms of getting people to actually want to do something, because in the US, you can still just kind of exit and leave and go somewhere and not have to worry about it. But that's not the case in the UK at all. One of the things that's also worrying about it in the UK that you mentioned is like there's just this completely non-factual story that they're using to motivate the protesters, right? Like in the UK, you don't even have this history of oppression of black people and whatnot, right? So it's like it's a very weird thing that's happening, I've noticed. Whereas just a few years ago, Scott Adams would talk about the two movies on one screen analogy, where everyone's sort of watching the same events but have totally different interpretations. But now I feel like we're not even watching the same movie anymore. I mean, the left at this point doesn't even agree factually with what's actually happening in front of their faces, right? So, and I think this is very dangerous and worrisome when you're living in this mass society and these large groups of people don't even agree on what is obviously and materially happening. That can only lead to very bad conflict, the way I see it, and this is extremely worrying to me, because if we don't agree on the facts, I don't understand how we can coexist in any peaceful way.
Yeah, I come to the same. I mean, again, it's that engineering geek brain. I'm like, if you're not going to accept first order data, I'm not sure if if you're not interested in things like observation, then it's kind of hard to build a house of sand when you don't even agree that so what you're seeing is real. Over here, I'll correct you a small thing: is our other bogeyman is not slavery. We have colonization, right? So everything is an excuse for colonization. Every English person has to take a knee because of colonization. That's the one. It's like it doesn't really matter if Britain has not colonized a place, they're still responsible for it. So the empires used to beat every native Brit to pieces. You are responsible. We have the statue thing going on now. And we had this creature, I'm not sure if you know of her, called Shamima Begum, who was one of the ISIS brides. And a couple of days ago, her lawyer won the appeal for her to return after her citizenship was stripped because she went to fight for ISIS and created
Yeah,
two
I do
Shamima.
remember that happening.
Yeah, she's just 2 days.
I didn't realize that was the same girl. I'd seen her name in the Twitter feed recently.
Oh,
Um,
she's literally, and the left are coming out screaming for her right to be not just forgiven, but to be understood, right? And
hmm.
I went this morning on another channel. I sometimes wander into, let's just say, the channels at the other side, and they were singing because one of the things English people like to sing is football songs, and there's lots of songs and stuff. And one of the most famous songs is "Football's Coming Home" from years ago when England was trying to win the bid for the cup. And now they're all singing Shamima's Coming Home in the same tone you would sing Football's Coming Home as a national icon for the nation and the sport. And you had a couple of black guys, a brown guy, a Muslim guy, and a white guy singing Shamima's Coming Home. And I was sitting there recording it in abject. I just didn't know how to respond to it. They were gloating and gleeing. And these are first and second generation new Brits. And at this point, at some point there is no dialogue, isn't there? If you've suspended belief, the emperor has no clothes. What is there? Is it just violence? I mean, I don't want to. One part of me doesn't want to look at the violent solution, right? I want to see
No.
what can I do in my little way for the rest of my life to prevent a violent outcome. Is there anything we can do that could make, even if it means a retreat, some sort of solution that isn't violent? So, and that's where tech comes in. But you did mention, I was terribly excited on the way out. You mentioned something about alt tech. So, what's that all about? That sounds, if you're at liberty to speak about it. But
Yeah, so I can talk about it a little bit.
yeah,
I'm working on some guys mostly related around the I guess academic agents community. We're sort of working on some alt technology to provide an alternative to Discord, basically, and myself and a few other guys are working on this. Basically, we want to provide a safe place for the right wing to develop communities that isn't going to be subject to censorship at all. And we're using lots of open source technology for this. So people have probably heard of Matrix. Matrix is an open source federated communications platform, basically. So it basically fulfills the purpose of Discord. But you can run your own server and have ownership over the entire infrastructure and database. And one of the cool things about Matrix and some other things we're looking at for video alternatives and such is that it's federated, it's decentralized, it's more along the lines of what the internet used to be or was supposed to be. So, for example, if you download like the Riot client, or it's called Element now, I think, you can sign into the matrix.org, the developers of that software. You can sign into their official server. But the way this tech works is that, or the way the federation works, right, is over at Agora, what we have is so Agora is like the Greek forum, basically, but ours is spelled Egora because it's like an internet forum, whatever.
very good. Yeah. So Igora.
So you could sign up. It's not publicly available yet. We're testing it out. But if you sign up on egora.org's Matrix server, you can chat there, make communities, join rooms, and then let's say you were mentioning on the stream yesterday setting up tech for Patriotic Alternative. So if Patriotic Alternative wanted, they could actually create and own and host their own Matrix platform, and users could sign up there, right? And your domain is part of your username, right? So all of our users are at agora.org. Anyone who signed up over there would be like at patrioticalternative.org. But what you can do with the federation technology is allow users to cross-pollinate. So let's say PA and Agora were agreed that we'll federate our servers. So now we can share users between the rooms. So you actually have a truly decentralized network of Discord alternative servers, basically, if you wanted to. Alternatively, you could just, and we're talking to various creators about this. If you don't want to bother with all of that, you just want to set up a community on Agora, you can just do that, right? And we'll host it, and you can live assuredly that there's not going to be any censorship for the right, because we're developing this specifically for libertarians and reactionaries, really. So that's what we're trying to set up, and I think this is going to be really really cool stuff once we finish with it.
But how will it actually work itself? Is it when you say it's federated and distributed? Is it on the blockchain or is it how is it
No,
distributed?
so I mean, it's so I guess Agora itself is centralized, right? So we have a
Okay,
database,
right.
and we're running the Matrix client, and users sign up, and we have total ownership. But if people wanted, like, there's another YouTuber called Don the Pleb, and he actually expressed interest in the platform, but he expressed interest in setting up his own server, which he could do, right? So he would own all of the users that signed up on his platform, but they were free to cross-pollinate. The problem on Discord is that there's one guy, one company controlling everything, right? All the users are on the Discord platform
Okay.
and subject to their
I
particular
see what you mean.
rules,
So
right?
you're federating the user sets and then you're allowing users to cross pollinate. So you could have N
Right,
servers with M user bases and a user could be an N servers, right? Okay.
right.
I got you.
So
Uh,
yeah, so the Agora server, I'll make a community there eventually, and so my community will be on the Agora server. But users who were on a completely different server, some other company, let's say PA had their own company, we could agree that, okay, we'll allow our users to enter each other's rooms, and then it's just like Discord to the end user. They don't see all of this going on in the background. But the cool thing is that it gives control over the actual platform itself back to the people who are interested in hosting it. Like literally anyone could, if they had the time and expertise, just spin up their own Matrix server and reach out and ask to federate with you. And the federation is something that's agreed upon by the various parties as well, right? And this is one of the cool things as well is the Matrix has its own federated infrastructure, and potentially if you sign up on their platform, we could federate with them and then have access to thousands upon thousands of users. The French government actually uses Matrix for internal communications. Very interestingly, the French are actually very based, I think, on the tech question. Like they're running a lot of internal stuff like Matrix, which is very interesting, right? The French
so the only way,
French government is using this.
if I was playing devil's advocate for a moment and I was the intelligence services or a hostile actor, I would have to hack all your end servers, right? So once you have sufficient servers at scale, then I'd have to hack them all, right? Is that how
Yeah,
it
so I
works?
mean, if someone hacked and attacked Agora, for example, and took us down, all the entire rest of the Federation would be fine. So anyone signed up on Matrix.org or the French government or a theoretical patriotic alternative hosted server, they would be fine and completely immune because essentially all this is different companies or organizations cooperating using the same technology.
Yeah,
And
so
they
I see what you
maintain,
mean. So,
yeah.
and it's just using there's nothing unique. Is it on TCP/IP? Is it nothing? There's no
Yeah, it's just it's completely normal technology protocols and all
normal
that.
HTTP, no normal
Um,
protocol, normal
we,
HTTP.
we
So
are
I mean, yeah, so it could still be potentially hacked, but what you couldn't, you don't have a single owner and a single point of failure, and you don't have a single source of interference. So if you had 1,000, if you had 50 of them for 50 states, and one went down, at least the user base could migrate and use the other 49 servers, right? So you're
right,
getting
and then
distributed. Yeah, gotcha.
and then for us, obviously, if Agora is successful and it grows, we'll host more servers, backups of the same server, basically. So we suffer like a DNS attack or something like that, we would still have backups. So like it's basically left down to the individual corporate body to figure out how they're going to handle their own internal security and all of that.
I guess, I mean, I'm just sorry now, I'm a bit excited about this kind of stuff, mate. So yeah, so I guess ultimately you could add on services that allow replication,
Yeah.
redundancy, and then you can have enough cooperating entities or whatever you want to call them, companies and bodies. Then you could start doing a soft replication or soft fault tolerance, right? So even if there was an explicit hack, you would be by voluntary consensus, you'd say, hey, you five guys keep backing me up, even though my data might be encrypted, just back me up and back me up. So at least it can bring it down, right? It's a bit like P2P was a Napster or something, right? Not Napster, I mean P2P, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, okay, brilliant. Yeah, my interest is more. I mean, this might come as a surprise to you. It's more on the psephology side. On the other side, I'm more interested in how can you win an election? Yeah, so what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years is I've got software now that ingests every we have the Office of National Statistics, which is our primary data source for the government, and I've just got the ontologies and all the stuff for the ONS ingesting all the data. So now the government, I feel ultimately we're going to run into a kind of a last stand, if you like, for the elections. And I believe we can win using quantitative techniques. I believe we can win by going street to street if we have enough data to be able to work out where we put the sufficient small amount of pressure to get the maximum result. Our next election is 2025, so 2024 is the campaign kickoff. So I've got some time under me to get it done, but I believe I can use the same kind of big data quant techniques I learned in investment banking for electioneering. So what I'm doing is slowly building up each of the data square by square, map by map, and trying to build up a way of modeling all 66 million UK citizen points. Because I believe we can use the metapolitical pressure of things like the Great Replacement, the impact on schools, the impact on hospitals, to find and locate the critical points of data where I think we could make a wedge to get into Parliament. So what I'm trying to do is it's going to take another bit of time to do it. But once I think that's done, I think we could then sign up every nationalist, sign up every citizen, allocate them. And are you familiar with things like just crossing the chasm, that kind of normal kind of stuff? I believe you only need 5 to 8% for each square to trigger people. So my idea is that I could build a platform that represents this, then we could decentralize and distribute the process of getting these communities built by people like PA and getting them to be then mobilized into finding other NATs so that they're preparing for elections. So my idea is to see if we could build these communities that would be IRL, but then literally drop them in on a square like you're playing a board game and go. And I've done a lot of work for one board, and I was trying to help out this kind of cockish party a few years ago. And one of the benefits was I got access to the electoral data for particular areas. So I know how the electoral data is organized. And in the UK, you can only get the electoral data if you're a political party that's registered or you're a credit rating agency. And once you have the electoral data, you can actually build an entire model because you can do things like find out how many people in the house, what their last name, first name is, etc. And you literally got a kind of game theoretic approach. You say, right, I live over here in a square. There's, the maths. If you don't mind, if I'm boring you about this, stop me, mate. But
No, no, no.
yeah, the maths is really easy in England because this kind of scaling of the numbers just fall out, right? There's 66 million people. There's 650 squares, so you got 100,000 people per square. Easy maths, right? In the 100,000 people per square, would you believe that the only about 70% of people are on the electoral list, and typically most of the seats are won with just a few thousand majorities. So on average, only 35,000, for example, or 30,000 is the number of people who win a seat. So if you then in school, as you say, okay, I got 100,000 people, 30,000 people win a seat, 20,000 are apathetic. If I use crossing the chasm type data, if I find that kind of 8%, 5% threshold, I only need to find 2, 5, 6,000 as superseders. And if they were physically viral, they're backed electronically or digitally. All they need to do is find their nearest people like them in their square, and those real world communities could actually be effective politically because we need a clean party, right? We cannot, the only way for us to win is with a clean party, right? We can't, it has to be a clean party. So taking that some ideas, right? So could I drop one in where I just then pre-populate the entire database with all the demographic data, hospital, schools, maps. So my code can do Google Maps, et cetera, and then the code already can read social media. So the idea then is we put a social media layer in where this community building that, unlike Discord and what you're talking about, are purely non-spatialized. They're not mapped onto the real world physically. I want to map the real world physicality into that incoming PA in the next year or so abstract community, and then go, right, what's your job? Your job is your job is the Alamo, right? Here's your square, here's your fort, here you go. Go find other people, bring them into the square and light them up. So that's the kind of like almost gamifying it, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah. No,
So
I like this approach a lot.
Yeah, I've been ingesting all the data sets. I've got health, I've got education, I've got population demography, I've got Google Maps laid up, ready to go. Obviously, there's no quite rush. Eventually, it's going to be like, whose streets, my streets, like whose square is this? That's my square. And the maths is so easy. 100,000, we know 30,000. Every time it hits 30,000, it goes left. for non-natives. So all we need to do is go up to the squares where there are no natives, right? And then you go, hey, okay, this is the. So I'm interested in that stuff. Though I do like what you guys are doing. I like all the alt tech about community building, but I think ultimately my only problem with that, if I was being slightly critical, with deepest respect, is I always find the problems with all of these things is that they're not wired to the physical ontology. So you might sit in a Discord server or Minds or Gabs, but you don't know the guy you're talking to. Is he 300 miles away? Is it the chap down the road?
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's nothing that connects it to the physicality. But we know from internet data that you spend only 2.7 hours online. Obviously, people on right like us will spend more time, and the majority of our world interactions are real world. And there's this massive impedance mismatch, if you like, between the physicality of your existence or your lived existence and your digital existence. So we come into a YouTube chat. If I read the names of the people, I know some of the people in real life in the chat stream. Other people I have no idea, for example, where Spacey Tracy is or where Justice is right is. Is Justice is right in Britain? Is he an 11-year-old girl in a cafe in Korea? No idea. I have no way of association physicality with the abstract. So I think that's going to be really important because when it comes, when the excrement hits the fan, so to speak, I think the physical real world is going to matter a lot. I mean, a lot.
It does absolutely. Well, and
Yes.
this is actually something that's being worked on as well. We have this thing called the basket weaving club to actually connect people in real life. That this is a process that's just starting. We have like a new Discord server for now to try and organize people to actually meet up based on their location in the real world and then start establishing these connections, which is a lot easier to do in the UK than it is in the United States. So I'm totally with you on that approach. We do need to bridge. We need to leverage the power of the internet and all this technology towards that end, not turn away from it. Right? Like some people have this innate. They feel this repulsion towards these to these online only activities, which I understand. But the solution isn't to turn away from the online; it's to leverage into it, to transform it into something that happens in the real world.
Absolutely, and when I was doing a little couple of streams, and people, if I took a complete right angle here, mate, and you think, what was my inspiration for this? Is really, if you look at the heart of the Turing thesis, right? If you look at the heart of theoretical computer science, and then you look at what I consider the brick wall in philosophy, right? Which is when Popper talks about his three world model, right? You've got this idea that there are three worlds. You're familiar with Popper's three worlds, right? Are you
Yeah,
familiar? Yeah.
type one,
So
type two, type three. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So if you look at the type 1, 2, 3 model and you go, look, hang on. So there's a type 1, there's a physical world. And then there's the abstract world, right? Like the area of a circle is, pi r squared, right? And then you've got these conscious creatures running around. We seem to have gone into this hyperpolarized state where there's a detachment between type 1 and type 2. Right, you're sitting on a Discord server. Banksy in the chat says I'm on the moon, right? And you've got this but I think it's psychologically and socially disassociative. And then you've got this idea that the problems we're facing on the physical world. So the inspiration for me was really Popper to Turing going, hang on, what I really want is an electronic matrix that is never disassociated from the physical world. I don't want anonymous IDs and I don't want anonymous data spaces that cannot be traced back to the world. So my core ontology in the model separates all three dimensions in its core model. So, example, if I say Ralph has joined the system and he lives in Stepney, I know Ralph is a physical creature. I know Stepney is an area, and any data sets emitted about Ralph or of Ralph or to Ralph are associating in all three worlds. So, because ultimately, I believe we're going to have to sort of almost paint the digital space over the real physical space, because ultimately, that battle, like we started this conversation off, is going to be between this abstraction of politics or this abstraction of living versus the actual concrete nature of living, right? And I can see there are lots of wonderful efforts. There's Jack Ways of the world. I'm not sure if you're aware of him. He's a
Yeah, yeah.
YouTuber. Yeah, so Ways and other people have got a thing called Nat Connect, where they at least you try to find another Nat in your area. But for me, at least, the challenge is like, well, if you're going to play this game and you're gamifying it, you're going to have to somehow marry the two, right? So in the case of Agora and Matrix and stuff, I mean, it would be interesting to see if you chaps thought about things like, well, do you really want to also apply physical and spatial data? Do you want to say, hey, here I stand, here's my physical part of the board? I mean, because a lot of people seem to almost get lost in the anonymizing. I'm not sure what you think about it. It's almost like you get an alter ego and an alter existence that you never speak to your friend like you would do to someone on Discord, right? You never shake his hand and then, curse him out. You get this kind of, I'm not sure what you think about it, but a detachment syndrome is the other thing I can think about it. I think that's not necessarily good for the right. I think we should be looking at grounding ourselves back in the flesh and in the real world. So
Yeah.
I'm not
Well,
sure
we,
what
we,
you
we live a very postmodern existence in that sense, where we're just projecting these simulations. And I mean, one of the weird things about it is, I guess my real world self is probably more of a simulation than my Discord. That's a very weird but true condition to be in. But I've basically tried as much as I can to merge these things back into one coherent personality. I mean, obviously you have to be careful in real life, right? So you're kind of forced into projecting the simulation. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like we shouldn't behave online in ways that we wouldn't behave in real life. And I for the most part say I don't like. I basically keep how I interact with people in these communities with how I would interact with real people, because ultimately I do want to recognize that I'm interacting with real people, and I actually want to have real interactions with them beyond just the digital world. So,
build real relationships too, right? Like,
yeah,
you'd hope a real relation comes out of, because I met so many people in real life now, because I also do some real life naughty things, like, sort of like putting out our message in the real world physically and stuff like that. So, because I speak at Speaker's Corner, and I'm desperate to get people to be able to merge these identities, because I believe they're psychologically damaging, and I think we're politically shot if we don't build real world communities, which, Mark and Laura are doing a fantastic job building up or booting up. At least they're trying to scale out the real world community stuff. But ultimately, then that must touch the digital community. So for me, the challenge was, well, what do I do if I was building a software model for this? What is this? And then Popper clicked in straight away. And I thought, right, of course, I'm going to have to paint the sets and differentiate them. So one of the lucky things is, because all of my work at Stanford and stuff was to do with semantic webs and topos and stuff. And you're almost forced to arrange ontologies in software that way, right? Because if I just created a custom domain model, and because I'm anti, like, for example, things like domain-driven design and stuff. I'm sorry, guys, in the chat getting a bit geeky, but I'm anti about things like domain-driven design and stuff, because I think they create abstractions that are logical, that are then disassociated from the physical, and then they merge the physical into their data sets and properties, and the whole thing's a bloody mess. So if I took I took your object diagrams, I took whatever way you're expressing, whatever code, your language you're writing, if I audited it by Popper, I find it to be an absolute mess, right? I mean, one property, the guy's real name, the other one's his username, one's his
yeah,
password, the other one's his address. Password is a type 2 thing. Real address is a type 1 thing, right? It's almost like we have no way to clean it out, right? So that's what I mean. I thought about this for a couple of years, and a good friend of mine, the Swedish friend, one of my best friends, about 7, 8 years ago, we thought of this problem for politics. This was before Brexit. He went back to Sweden and he mapped, using this thing, the entire Swedish political system. If you go to a project called hack23.cia, and because he's completely ANCAP blackpilled, like he's just given up completely in Sweden. He's just, for the last few years, he's been in the papers and stuff. He's just tracking every political event in Sweden, and he's just emitting the data nonstop. So you can drill parties by politicians, by everything. And the idea, and I look at that and think, wow, so you've got an abstract data set of all this stuff, but you've got no real life example. But then if you look at the real world communities, you've got real world people, but they don't really have any power of data code behind them. And then you've got this third world, which is what you chaps are doing on Discord or Gabs or Minds. And I just see those things ultimately creating only virtual communities, not physical communities, right? So somehow this is the kind of, for me, the sweet spot, right? And we've got election coming up, and I think we only have 2 or 3 elections before it's lost in the UK. I think we don't get it in 15 years. We're never
yeah.
going to get it. We're going to have to roll over. So
Yeah, well, the good thing is technology is extremely empowering, and we can actually leverage that to overcome these demographic hurdles that we face, because we can actually amplify our power, 10 or 100-fold by leveraging these things. And one thing I realized that's pretty white pilling is how much engineering. How many engineering minds we have on the raid. It seems like every other guy I talk to is a programmer, and it's a very weird thing I've noticed, but this is very good. And one of the things I'm trying to do with this observation is figure out how we can actually, cooperatively leverage this technical ability towards some really useful end. what you're talking about, I don't know if you realize this, and maybe most people don't, but one of the ways that the Trump campaign won the election was with basically exactly what you're talking about. They used machine learning technology to very specifically target individuals in very specific areas in critical states to actually win the electoral college. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and most people don't realize this. The Republican Party was way ahead of the Democrats in 2016 in terms of their technology, and I think if the Republicans win again in 2020, it will probably be because of the technological advantage they've maintained, if they have in fact maintained it. So this is the type of thinking we actually do need to apply, because it does work. I mean, I think for sure Trump would not have won that election if it wasn't for leveraging the most advanced technology they could in favor of how they targeted things. I see
Can I
showing on
share?
screen here.
Yeah, can I share something with you, mate? Do you
Yeah,
mind?
yeah.
I mean, yeah, okay. Because I had no idea you were a geek, right? So there are only 10 types of people in the world, right? People like you and I and all the civilians, right? So, right. So tell me what you think, mate. So I've got this is part of my war room, right? And so I'll just fly through some slides. I'd love your feedback. So here's the thinking for me, right? So we know from the Hewlett Packard days, right? We know from the data from the 60s and HP that all transformations go through the crossing of the chasm, right? Are you familiar with that? So we know, for example, that if I adopt an iPhone or anything else, if I don't break through the first derivative of 2 to 15%, I
Okay.
never get to market. It fails.
I
Right.
haven't
So
I haven't seen the chasm terminology before, but
okay,
it
yeah.
makes sense.
So basically, this is the S curve, right? It's the adoption curve, right? So
Yeah.
the innovators are 2.5%. This is backed up quantitatively in all business data, right? So this is standard stuff at Harvard, MBAs, everything. So we know 2.5% of the innovators, 13.5% are the early adopters, and then we get the fail. If
And
you
the
get over, you get the normies, right? So if I give you an example, I'm going to run through a particular board. Let me just run through some stuff, right? I'll show you what the UK looks like. So I took one of the squares. We have 650 squares, right, for 650 MPs. This is one of them. This is what the population looks like on aggregate. You got 100,000 people in there. You got 70,000. So you take out the kids and stuff, right? And foreigners who live there. You got 70,000. 70% are the electorate. 21,000, 20% are apathetic. The turnout is only 50%, and you've got the three parties fighting. In this case, the Conservatives won with just 25%, right?
mm-hmm.
So if you look at that data, then if I look at that and I run the maths on it, you can see that the innovators are only 1,200 people in a square. 6,815 of them would get me to the chasm. So the name of the game is a hunt for what I would call superseders, right? I want to find these people first. I'm not going to say how I'm going to find them. So if I just fly through this, I'll show you some interesting stuff. I'd like your feedback. This from all my data. Is this the yeah? So if you look at the UK and you look at the distribution of these by squares, if I look at London, so this is the target area I'm using for which I have a whole electoral data. This is the in and out in London boroughs. If you break this down by scale, you look at, if you jump into each of them, you say, okay, that's my geospatial area. This guy on the left is, this guy on the right is a conservative. He's a conservative, only a name, right?
Right.
And this is my regional power. If I break this down into only 4 dimensions down, it breaks into 10, in this case, 17 wards, 8 and 9 wards. Breaking down there, I can find each household data. If I drill down by down into district sector, you can see this scale is now almost a community.
Mm-hmm.
You can see a open space, you can see a children's center, you can see an ambulance station, you can see the schools, a tennis academy, and you can see streets by streets. I just need to go down to one more level over here. I am literally in what you might call, an American might call a block, right?
Yeah.
You might use the term, hey, here's my block, like what's that horrible song, Jenny from the Block, right? So here's Jenny from the Block. So the idea here would be if I could spatially drill down, right? Spatially drill out into this area and have the software back each of these ideas and then give each 66 million people a unique ID. Now the name of the game is going to be, could I get an application up and running that precedes all the data down to one by one, puts in using Google Places APIs, all the key things we need to know, drops the dots onto each house, characterizes them, whether they've been allocated, discovered, where they are in the cross of the chasm, what are their profiles. And what we need then is a way to run through that one by one to find what is the messaging strategy that takes these people? What is the application I need to find each person to light up? So imagine something like a Nationalist Connect community or some kind of online physical community. You've got this abstract community sitting in the world above, but you haven't got a particular way to apply that, right? You don't have a way to get it. But like you say, we've got all the high IQ geeks on our side, right? For the most part, we want almost to say, look, we want to find this crossing the chasm percentage. We want to find where they are. We want to write an application that says, I sign up, and notice there's nothing anonymous about it. I would anonymize the IDs for privacy, right? I'd use, standard privacy and protect, public access, private protection. But I want to be able to light up each of these and then get into a door-by-door, street-by-street area to characterize them, to get these people together, form a physical community. Maybe they meet at the Costa Coffee in Rose Hill. Maybe they meet once a week in this Papa John's Pizza. And maybe they meet in the maybe they meet for an open space to walk the dogs. The idea being that you're building up this community with the view of, if I flip back up to that this chappy over here. Sorry, I've got so much data. You know that the 20% apathetic, if you look at all the data, none of them are signing up because the data shows you they don't care or they don't know which party supports them. So now I want to just, if you don't mind, I'm going to show you one more little thing, which is interesting for the UK. If I swap, this is I shouldn't be sharing all my war room stuff like this openly, but it's you, mate, so I don't care. What's the worst that could happen, as the ad says? If you bear with me a second, we have this fascinating thing in the UK called six-tribe segmentation. I'm not sure if there's an analogy in the US. Let me see if I can find.
I haven't heard of this.
Oh, yeah. So we have the longest, where is it? Bear with me a second. Sorry about this. I just need to rapidly. When you come home flustered and you're late for your own stream that you cared about, it's like nothing goes right after that. It's a comedy of errors. Bear with me a second. I want to find a particular diagram that would be of great interest to you, I think, my man. So let's see which one has it. This is all about. Where is it?
Sorry, so this is the kind of I think specific targeting we need, because one of the problems we have on the right is that we have lots of energy, but our being online are abstract, but also our goals are very abstract. We don't actually have data-driven specific targets for what we're trying to achieve. So I think what you're doing here is extremely useful in actually setting specific. You could make a military goals analogy. You can't actually fight a war without objectives, right? You need specifically well-defined objectives.
Mate, it's worse than that. I'm building when I called it the war room, so I found the one I want. I called the war room. Actually, building the whole platform's entire objective is to go to war, literally down to data-driven, goal-driven, campaign-driven, the whole bloody thing. So it's just coming through it. Can you see this, chat? Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So if I run through, so the UK, the UK longitudinal data for 14 years. We have 14 years from a government study that samples the political views of the United Kingdom. The far left use this tremendously. Social organizations use this. Diversity studies use this. We are segmented politically in 6 tribes. The reason I brought this up for you, mate, is I believe the US has something similar. I haven't looked because I'm not dealing with the US. This pattern, I suspect, holds in other Western European and the United States nations. If you look at this thing, it's held longitudinally from February 2011 till 2020. The 6-tribe model says on the left, and this is the best classification, the government uses this, and the government funding programs use this, and let's just say public policy initiatives use this. On the left is our enemy. The classification is far left is confident multiculturals. Notice how from 2011 till the last data point, they went from 8 to 20% and quiesced.
Yeah.
Confident multiculturals are Alexander Cortez in your case, Owen Jones in our case. The next one are yellows are like mainstream liberals, think Sargon. So Sargons, all the guys who are kind of liberal, but they're not progs, right? They're not progressives. On the other side, notice the terminology and just the language used by the government. We are either considered active enmity, I would put ourselves here on the right, or we are latent hostiles, right? So you can see the language itself is skewed. And what people call normies, which is about 45%, are the people who are either immigrant ambivalent or culturally concerned.
Yeah.
So the name of the game for me is, if you keep in mind the pattern of the crossing the chasm and each square scaling down, we know who these people are. They support PA or they support like, all the right wing movements. Our job would be to seed and find these superseders first, give them a campaign plan that allows segmentation, personalization, messages that are tailored to that specific area, and then to be able to take it to the normies, because all you need is a tiny percentage swing here to whack a square, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah,
So the idea for me was to build up this mass segmentation model, bring it into personality dimension analysis, take the messaging in. But we can share. I should probably stop sharing this shit because I don't know who the hell's on the stream. Sorry, guys. I'm just like turning this stuff off like now. So what I'm doing is, people in the chat are saying they're normies. You're not normies. You're civilians, guys. You're civilians, right? So yeah. So that's my thing is to build. So I think we should probably I think we can have a different conversation sometime, maybe in private about this stuff. I think it should be very interesting to see what you guys are doing and what I'm trying to achieve for the UK. But I think we have a chance to use the tech. And in my case, I want to physically, I want to impose this plan that's in the virtual digital space onto the physical board. You can see what I'm trying to do. Load up the data for each square, and then allow people like Mark, Lauren, or to send out their people. And like you say, the problem with that, you've got all this energy and IQ in the right, but it is not. I'll be blunt. If you were working for my teams at a company, I've run many startup stuff, I've scaled many large teams, I'd fire half of you, right? Because you're not delivering any results, right? Do you know what I mean? You're not actually,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, no disrespect. I love you a lot, mate, but you spent 6 hours chatting on Telegram and you've got nothing I can score, right? So I think if we had some way to build a system where it's goal driven, it's data driven, it's supported by big data techniques, it's supported by a fully integrated platform that says, hey, here I'm running around. I'm not just wandering around going, hash white lives matter, bash kill the commies. I'm not doing anything silly like that. I'm going, how can I find the other guys who are going to be committed to finding other chaps to virally spread this community with the aim at taking power, right? So that's my kind of like main kind of like the thing. Every day I wake up, I think, right, how can we save the West and how can I get some more code written? So I don't know about. I'm sorry, I know we're meant to be about neo-reactionary stuff. Let's roll back in. What do you think about the latest? I'm sorry, I'm enjoying this chat too much. What do you think about the latest affairs with Curtis and stuff? What do you think of the clear pill, and what do you think his objectives are? Do you have any take on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So at first, I sort of found the clear pill kind of confusing and then cringe, but I think I'm kind of on board with it now. So I've been watching all of his streams, including some of the very low key ones he did. He did one with this Ethiopian guy, and then did another with this Arabic guy who lives in Germany. Like just really low key stuff. So I've listened to him talk, and I've read most of his new writing, and I think what the clear pill is about is basically, we have this problem where there's tons of energy being just sort of blindly dumped into this political system we have now, where people are just participating in politics en masse in these protests. They're involved with each other en masse in terms of causing these massive problems and freakouts on social media. You just have this problem of mass participation, whereas I think what he's trying to do with the clear pill is more or less demobilize people who shouldn't be dumping energy into politics without any particular goals, because all it does is cause chaos. What you're trying to do with what you just showed, I think, is try to direct specifically useful energy towards a specifically useful goal. So I think what Curtis is trying to do is demobilize unnecessary activity that's just causing problems for everyone, because it's actually feeding into the cathedral and empowering it. And I think that's what he means by the clear pill, is not that you should give up and stop participating, but that, basically, if you're a normie, why are you just sort of like mindlessly dumping your energy into this system that doesn't get you anything, right? So that's my take on what he's doing recently.
Yeah, I think it's almost like I mean, I have legitimacy. I don't know if you heard my stream yesterday. You did hear the stream yesterday. I'm not into the patchwork model as a solution. I'm into the power analysis, but I don't even for moral reasons agree with patchwork. But I agree with winning using democratic national techniques. And I think you're right, because it's what would you want to call it? It's like an increasing returns pattern for noise. the more people who have a little worth saying that just pile in, you get this kind of frenzy feeding, right? It's almost like, when servers go wrong and stuff, suddenly you get all this traffic and it gets like really messy. And you just wish there were no more requests for a while. You just think like, if you guys could just stop using the software, it would be really useful, right? If you could just calm down and not like hit the page anymore, guys, right? But they keep coming. Yeah. So in a sense, I look at that analogy, go, right, what you're trying to do is do traffic reduction, because with that, it's not a linear phenomena, right? Hopefully, if you calm it down, take the temperature down a bit, there may be a non-linear benefit. And we could see from the apathy figures, those apathy figures I showed you for the UK, those apathy figures show up in all OECD countries for the last 40 years. Mm-hmm. So there is a large apathy set that has been now made hysterical, for lack of a better word, right? They've been whipped up. And calming them down, I think, would be a benefit to us generally. I don't think it's a source of a solution, and I don't think it'd be taken to the extreme, and therefore anything could be unwound by the clear bill. But I think there's some merit for that, right? I think there's some merit in that approach. But fundamentally, I don't see any answers there, right? I think it's more like kind of saying, "Hey, cool it, guys," right? Like, what was that great alt-type video? Cool it with the anti-Semitism, right? It's a kind of cool it message, right? But I like much more when every time you talk about goal-driven, and I think we need more ways for the geeks to help of any persuasion in the sub-politics to help people understand how tech can really, really help, or what you and I would think is just pretty pedestrian engineering best practices to be applied to the politics, right? So I try very hard. I try to step out of Telegram and social discourse. I mean, I rarely on Discord anymore, because I just tell people, dude, if I just ran a query on how long you spent on Discord or Telegram, all he did all day was make noise on it. You didn't actually do anything. You didn't produce any artifacts I could audit, right? I mean, my code can go rip your data out of your social media. All I see is that you're a persistent set of signal and noise, right? You have to. We somehow, I think, geeks have a responsibility to help people understand that it's not goal driven, it's not auditable. There's no way that process could be subject to anything where I would give it a score that the value of the work was of any value I wanted to see. I'm trying to be polite, because I know lots of people here probably hate me for this, but I think people are spending too much time making a lot of noise, and because they're all right-wing with reasonably high IQs and fairly all fired up, most of it is antagonistic. I don't see very many productive conversations anymore. I think they do their minimum set. I'm not sure if you agree, but I see most of it.
I agree completely. And this is why, especially after some of the recent bannings, I've limited my participation on Discord to very specific places focused on more productive activities. This is a huge problem we have, where people are just, I see it all the time, where a lot of people are just complaining. And this is useful to an extent initially to sort of get energy ginned up. But that actually needs to be directed anywhere, and will never, ever get anywhere if you're just sitting on Discord complaining. And you can actually do, especially if you leverage technology like this, that can generate specific small-scale targets, you can actually do something very productive without actually spending a lot of time on it. It's not even a big ask to ask people to actually do something. Doing something doesn't have to be, standing up an entire software stack and this massive floor plan that you're doing. That's great, but if you're just a person just kind of in the milieu and you want to help, you can actually do something very small and still actually provide some sort of useful help, other than just complaining in a chat room. Because at the end of the day, that's just sort of a cathartic, indulgent activity, right?
I think it's understandable given people's frustration, but I think there's two kind of patterns I watch. Once I think they overshoot the horizon, and then I believe it becomes negative both for themselves and the cluster of interactions. I watch the negativity itself foster and rise. And secondly, I think you can't blame people, because there's no central HQ giving them any tasks.
Right.
So if I run a team and then the team guys are sitting there twiddling their hands because they got no stories or no tasks, or they got no goals, I can't really blame them for having no work. Someone needs to direct them. So a big thing about the platform I'm trying to write is that it would actually engage everyone who is not techie to have very physical and localized activities. Like your job today is, hey, no one plastered the Papa John pizza with the sticker or the Q code. So everyone can pick up a task and go. So it'd almost be like the equivalent of the OSS best practices, right? It would be OSS best practices with like a public task list. So I'm using everything about open source in the principles behind it to go, hey, anyone can, rather than picking up a coding task, can pick up a digital task for their square, for their board. And the only way to use that for normies, it must be very, very easily accessible normie tasks, but the task must somehow be subject to the central goal, right? So the goal for the square was, for example, we started the square's mission plan. You're the first 20 people, and 20 people boot up the square. Your next, the initial phase might be, let's go find the other superseders, right? So your jobs might be, have you pulled the Telegram groups? Have you tried to find people in your square? So we could create task templates so then that some of that vibrant energy could be applied to activities that they could go, hey, when I'm going to drop the kids off at school, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. Right, that way we can actually use like open source kind of processes and techniques and put it into the real world, because I think a lot of people have that energy and the vibrancy online, and then you can't blame them for the end of the day they're exhausted and nothing was achieved, right? Zero work was achieved, right? So if I came in with my McKinsey hat, I'd fail the entire alt-right, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, that's sort of my main complaint with whole nationalist right in general, is that there's just 90% of the time is spent on completely useless activity, and I want to see real productive activity happen, which requires a lot of self-discipline from the right people, and that's what I really want to see happen. I mean, the practices you mentioned, that's actually how we're developing the Agora platform. Is there's basically we have a leadership, and we essentially just have a list of tasks, and there's tons of different tasks, and whoever can and wants to do the task just takes it and does it, and then that's completed. And these types of tasks range from actually doing programming work to just finding people who are interested in the platform and that sort of thing. So this is the kind of methodology that can be applied en masse to give people something useful to do.
I'm not sure what you think, but you see what me, if you think of it, it could be quite Herculean in the large, right, so to speak. And for me, the big thing is that because I know the spatial data matters so much and I know it correlates with internet usage, I want it to be localized. I want people to feel like, I walked down the street, I was really angry because I saw these guys throw their litter around the chicken shop. Right, so you people engage much more in the physical with their visceral, with their entire body, and I want some way to be able to use OSS techniques and say, hey, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a coder, I don't even know how to use a computer, but I know every time I walk by that shop and I see something I don't like, I'll take a photograph and I won't just post it on Twitter. I'm going to add it to our library for that square, for that place, for that day, right? The idea is to build up that kind of data sets, build up the activity, and then apply it spatially. Because for me, without political power, I mean, you might as well run to the hills, right? I mean, I'm not sure what else. Well, we don't have hills here. We have vacillations and undulations of land. Run to the undulation, right? So it would be. And how big is the Agora team, man? Tell me more about your stuff. How long has it been going for, and how many guys are there?
So we started like maybe 9 months ago, and then kind of put the project on hold just because the open source tech from Matrix wasn't really where we wanted it to be. But now we've kind of had a fire under us by the ramping up of Discord bannings and such. So maybe we have like something around maybe 10 to 15 people.
Good size team, yeah.
And you can my mind is blanking. What is the distribution where it's like 10% of the people do like we have Pareto.
like a Pareto principle.
Yeah, we sort of have a Pareto distribution, probably just in terms of activity.
Yeah. I find the Pareto pattern holds strongly, even within teams, even within activities. You see the people pick the heavyweight. But I'm a maybe this is part of a spiritual ethos. I believe there's room for everyone, and everyone has a part to play. So I'm always against, even though I've spend most of my time in elite tech teams, I'm always for what does the little guy need the most, right? I don't worry about my ace developer. I don't have to worry about him because he's the ace developer. He just does his thing, right? I have to worry where the little guy goes like, hey, I can't really get this code to work. And the same way, I think we need to carry the people who need the most, right? We need to get them to feel productive, for lack of a better word. I believe people have a higher self-actualization when they feel their contributions are valued, right? I don't know if you agree with that, yeah?
Yeah. And so we have like maybe 10 to 15 people, and maybe 5 of them aren't particularly adept at really high level programming. They're more like web developers, a lot of them undergrads, but together they're contributing really useful work to like the design and that sort of thing. So we've only actually been doing this actively now for maybe about a month or two. But we're trying to find more people to help us and really ramp things up and spend as much free time as we can on the project. For some of us, it is difficult. I mean, for me, it's difficult because I have normal work to do, and then I have to upkeep my channel and do streams like this, and then also find time for this open source programming, and then read so I can.
Tell me about it, man. I got hit by the COVID-19, and I'm pretty religious. I get up at 4 or 5 in the morning, and I kind of work, and I've been shattered by this COVID thing, and it's made me. I don't often get internal rage, but I've been so angry with this clearly synthetically engineered virus that has messed up my grand plans to save the United Kingdom. So inside me, there's a little thing that goes, right. Is it the entire Chinese people, the Chinese government, or is it a small virus I can't see that I wish to decimate using extreme prejudice? I'm not sure what it is, but I'm going to kind of let it slide inside me, right? Because inside I'm like, But no, I think it's quite uplifting to talk to you about this stuff. I think we need some way, I think, to get the geeks almost to help people with these messages, right? I think there are a lot of geeks in there who are quite shy. I get contacted by one a day, usually 2 a day, say, how can I help you? How can I help you? And usually it's like, I don't really want much help yet until there's kind of a process going. But I think we almost need at some point, I think we'll need a kind of almost an explicit nationalist tech community. It's almost like we need
that's kind of what we're doing, honestly.
Yeah, but it's almost like you want geek tech corp, right? Where you know what I mean. It's almost like we need to take the patchwork principle, but not apply it for society, but apply it for our geek principles, and then kind of say, hey, we are the geeks, and like we're here for we're here to help the cause, right? So, but then a lot of people don't really like geeks as well. There's usually a resistance, right? So there's a kind of like, who are these geeks, right? why are they showing us stuff? But brilliant. Are you planning ever to visit the UK, my man?
I've been before. I've been to London. I took a trip. I took a trip in 2018 for the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War to just go around France and mostly. And I stopped in London for a little bit there and hung out. So I definitely want to come to the UK again. I'm a little afraid to right now, honestly, just because of what the government is doing. I'm kind of afraid I'll be arrested or something just for showing.
Oh, I think you'll be fine, mate. You're always welcome to come visit. But it's because I think a physical meeting, I think, is also really important the last year or so, because my history has been, I wasn't sure what to do with the right. My friends and I thought of a democratic nationalist party. We weren't sure what to do because everything was under the shroud and cloud of Brexit. And then I fiddled around with a couple of possible parties. I don't really believe or trust them. And then I thought I'll spend a year at Speaker's Corner, and I'll just go there by myself. And my job was, because my code can record every YouTube comment, I can pass and ingest Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, all of them, right? And I was like, you know what I'll do? I'll go stand in Speaker's Corner. And because I'm not white, I'm just going to stand up there and I'm going to just talk about white rights. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on all these streams and I'm going to record every comment made by my provocation. And I stopped recording it 3 or 4 months ago, and I have 48,000 comments, of which 80% are anti-white, right? So this is the heart of diversity as a strength, right? They're just literally anti-native, right? So, and from that, I then stumbled across the fact that PA was happening and everything else. I'm like, okay, here's where it has. But I'm still very frustrated because I think like we should go a lot quicker. And maybe that's the geek side of me. Do you ever feel that feeling like people are just not like moving quickly enough? Or is that just me? Do you ever feel like you want people to like, can we just get on with this now? Can we chop, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we are. So I'm conscious. I don't know how much time you have, chat. I know I've kept you for a while. I feel very conscious. I've been late. How long have you been going for? I mean, I'm happy to chat for longer, a little bit longer as well if you want. I'm very conscious. I'm not keeping you. Have you got any questions about the UK or where we are? Or do you have anything you want to know about our end of our side of the pond and stuff like that? Or
I guess one of the things that's of interest to me is, I guess, the layout of sovereignty in your country compared to the United States. I mean, you have all of your sovereignty nested in Parliament, basically. You don't really have the same division of powers as the United States has, especially since your monarch is so weak. So I'm interested in like how you think Moldbug's power analysis applies specifically to the UK. Does it really work as well there with the parliamentary system? And are the Tories the inner party in the UK? Because that's kind of what it feels like, honestly.
I don't really agree like that. The inner party. If there's an inner party, I would say it's the global homo. So let me divide it for this way. Yeah, we have a polarized, almost a two-party system, and not quite. But if I apply more Bargain analysis to it, there is the global homo MPs on both sides.
Mm.
So there's a civil war raging in the Conservative Party. My estimate is somewhere between 40 something members of parliament to 50 on the Conservative Party are right wing nationalists, but are terrified of party HQ. On the left, you've got a civil war raging between our equivalent of Cortez and everyone in the prog left against the global homo Labour Party members. So that civil war was just ended with an election contest with the Labour Party, and they've gone back to the global homo leader as opposed to the far left leader. So the real inner party is about 60 or 70 MPs who are basically funded by global homo elite. So I'll give you examples. I worked at a lot of investment banks. I worked at, like, say, HSBC. So I was in Paris during Brexit, working at HSBC. HSBC funds both sides. Their power and lobby is to the Conservative Party and to the Labour Party. So all of the four organs of the cathedral are funding this. If you'd like to call it an inner party, it crosses traditional party lines. So in terms of the inner party, you've got a cabal, for lack of a better word, of pure global homo club members of parliament who will. I'll give you examples. So when Boris Johnson comes in with the biggest majority that he got lucky on, what is the first two things he does? He takes the BDS, the boycott, diverse sanctions position for the side of Israel, and then he raises the upper cap on migration. So an alleged conservative MP with an absolute majority in the House of Commons, his first thing is go global homo with Israel, followed by go global homo with migration. And the same side, if the Labour had the absolute majority, i.e., they'd be the centrist Labour wing, they would do the identical thing. So in our case, the inner party isn't a single party; it's a because we have the way funding works here is, and disclosure rules work. You can see that the funding from HSBC, from Goldman Sachs, from Coca-Cola, from Ford are perfectly hedged. So the cathedral is hedging both sides of the red and blue for us.
That
So
definitely
really,
happens to some extent here as well.
yeah, so really it's not on traditional party lines. So if I was using in outer party kind of metaphors for us, that inner party is the global homo party of Davos. And they are literally unashamedly sheep. Now, in terms of distribution of power versus states' rights, we have local authorities. So we have 650 MPs and we have 390 local authorities. So local authorities larger than a constituency square. And the local authorities are completely riddled with the progressive left for the most part. So if they're progressive left in the urban areas, which are predominantly, they're going to spend all their money. So where I live is 70% Muslim. I live in the heart of the city of London. And it's the second or third, depending what ranking you use, most corrupt council in England. And it's literally they're building new houses with global homo money, and the local council is giving it to all the Bengali people first. So at the local level, you have nepotism based on tribal lines, and it just triggers white flight everywhere. And then the bits that are incoming where I live is where the hipster elite and the city elite live. So it's hipster elite, city elite, and then third world migration. So you can see that the party, the cathedral is feeding the local level using nepotism, using all sorts of techniques that are anti anything you'd stand for a value principle. And at the parliamentary level, they are funding those. So if you look at our exception cases, MPs who go against the grain are very quickly shifted to the wings. If you look at the rural area patterns, you've got an inversion of, you've got an IOC pattern going there. You've got like large parts of beautiful parts of England, like Devon, Cornwall, Somerset, they're like 90+% native. And those people are wandering around. If you imagine that Six Strides model, they read about the problems of the cities, but they don't face them. So it shows up in apathy. So they vote blindly for the Conservative Party because they're not being impacted. Remember their culturally concerned versus immigration ambivalent? Yeah. They're not buying the multicultural story. They're like liberal in name because they're like, oh yes, of course, diversity is a strength for Britain because I don't see anything diverse around me. Right? Yeah. So one of my mates has got a great idea. He wants to set up a real life mission where we do diversity tourism, where you take all these people from key white areas in England and you pay and you set up tours where you bring them in and you show them. You don't bring them and show them like, the British Museum. You bring them and you take them around the hood. and you want to make them walk around, like if a good Midwestern couple from Ohio took a day out in Detroit, they wouldn't be comfortable walking down the street, right?
Well, this is kind of what I was getting at earlier, the problem of some people in America being so distant from all that's actually a pretty clever and somewhat comedic solution. I think if you really showed people what it was like in some of these places, they would probably be a lot more active in their response to it.
Yeah, this guy literally thinks because he comes from the southwestern England, where he says, "Look, I just can't wake anyone up. I just tell all my friends, my families, and they all smile at me. They say, oh well, these Indian people seem really nice, and these African people seem really nice, but they're only concepts of fiction because there's like one guy in the village, right?"
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
about it.
I've walked through London and it does not feel English at all. So I could only imagine what actual English people would feel if they went through some of these areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if I'll tell you what I'll do, man. Just because you haven't been here for a while, I'm going to turn my camera on, and I'm going to show you where I am right now. So I don't know if you can see it and stuff. Hey, where's my camera? Sorry, I'm a bit grubby, man. So where I live, can you see this shit?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can just flip this over here. Hang on a second, man. So I live in yikes. How do I make me big and you small? Away.
I think there's like yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. So that's where I live in the city, right? So that's like the financial area of the city. This is the city of London, right?
Yeah.
So there's 100,000 people in the square. Now, do you see what I see over there? Do you see that golden minaret?
Yeah.
Okay, that was built under explicit conditions for COVID, when everyone was to have stopped working and nothing was moving. They didn't stop. They built that entire thing during COVID.
Hmm.
So the idea you can see straight away is that right in the heart of the city over there's a minaret that just shot up, and they work 24/7 during the COVID times. So over here, you have this crazy.
It's right next to that other disgusting building, right? Yeah.
yeah. So you've got this crazy area that you've got this density population over here, and the idea would be, how do you take that square back, right? You've got this, and that's why I'll take off my old camera. Sorry about this. Shit, a bit grubby, man. So I mean, you've got this idea that you've got to somehow, for me, you've got to physicalize it, spatialize it, localize it, make it real, right? So that's me. But anyway, I've probably been ranting for a while. So if you've got anything else, I'm conscious it's been a while and stuff, man. I'd love to do another one sometime where we can get a bit more into pure NRx stuff. I think this was our first chat, so I'm sure most of the stuff we're quite familiar with, you and I. So generally, but I'm not sure if you have any
other thing. I'm curious, and I think you kind of answered this in your approach, but I'm kind of struggling with I guess how much we should actually participate in the existing political system versus detach from it and just sort of try and build or rest on some alternative. I think in the UK, because of the scale, it makes a lot of sense to do what you're doing and participate in the parliamentary politics. But in the United States, the system is so much larger. There's so many more layers to it. I wonder whether or not we should actually be participating in federal politics or be concentrating really only at the state levels, because I think state sovereignty is potentially very powerful in the United States, much more than the sort of regional sovereignty you might be able to achieve in the UK. So do you think...
My views? My view of that is on the back of what you said, because I was thinking one of my background threads was firing because of what you told me for the numbers. Is it would seem like the only thing the US has that can hopefully save it is the Constitution, right? It's an explicit Constitution. It would seem that going for states' rights would be the best way of blocking a change to the Constitution, right? I mean, that would seem like, so if you were to organize locally, win locally in your local House of Representatives and stuff, you might have a chance of saying you're never getting the 70%. Right, we've got such a lockdown on our state, and then it would have to require something spatially that says we're going to keep, like, Idaho, Washington, Montana. These states are going to be the states that will never agree to a change in the first or second. I think if they ever get to change the first or the second, it's all over for the US, right? I mean, the second's a fallback, and the first is, if the first goes, the second will go, right? I think they'll go for the first before the second. They'll go for speech, right? That's the one they want, right? That you can say what you want in the States, right? Even though they've got social media power. So I would guess, if I was in the States, I haven't lived there for a while, but I would guess, state local power is the best bet. And in the worst case, if it is going to fall, then the real defense of the people would have to be at the community level, right? So in that case, you would have to have created strong local communities. And the great thing about the US is, because I had a girlfriend for 6 or 7 years from Ohio, and I remember living there for the first time, first few summers. We'd go up to sailboats and Lake Erie and stuff. And the sense of community in Ohio, I say a small town, it was like 70,000 people or something, right? It was incredible community, right? I mean, I had this little anecdote. I thought, oh, I'm going to cook for the Schaefers. So I thought, I'll go cook for you, Mr. Schaefer. So I went down to the grocery store, and little did I know, they said paper or plastic, right? And I was like, oh, I don't know, paper, I guess, or whatever. Then I realized that walk that seemed really short was about 3.5 miles. So I'm wandering around with like 6 or 7 paper bags going, man, this was really dumb. And this kind of car just rolls by me and just lowers his window, going, gosh, you must be the chap from London visiting the Schaefers. In England, when a car slows down by you, you go defense, man. You go like, what the hell is this, right? And everyone seemed to know who I was.
Mm.
And it still resonates that you had such strong community, which is really very, very difficult in England. England, that density, we don't have it. So I'd say the US, your local community is going to be essential. And I guess local power, right, because you're not going to get it federally, right? I don't think because you can't compete with like you. I mean, I spent a lot of time in California. I was in LA recently. I go to the States a lot, and LA is just like, San Francisco. I took some friends around, and I took my missus around, and there was a guy defecating on Market Street.
Yeah, it's so far gone.
Like, yeah, I couldn't believe it. He just literally lowered his pants, just defecated. To those guys who don't know, the Chad Market Street is like the main street that cuts San Francisco in half. He just like dropped his trousers and was just like defecating. You're like, wow. Yeah, and there were needles everywhere. So I think the cities are gone, right? I don't see any way I don't think an ordinary Americans would want to go and live and bring up have their children brought up in San Francisco, right?
No,
I think you got to just give those up and go for smaller towns, smaller cities where it's almost like this might come across as the wrong tone and sentiment. It's almost like you need to reinstate your own form of self-segregation, right? It's almost like you need to buy up areas that are not pleasant for other people to move into, right? You want to rebuild communities of like-minded people, right? Legally and officially, and that would require a tremendous amount of organizations, which is where geeks come in again, right? So you can imagine projects that go, right, let me spatialize the data. Where's the best places to live? Where would I want to bring up? I'm a young American family. I've just had my first child, about to have my first child. I want to be able to easily find which kind of people, which kind of communities where I could commit for taking my kids to, say, junior high or something, right, in a safe place, right? Because I would have an event planning horizon of 10 to 12 years, right? So if you're a young family, you're just starting out, you're like, hey, I got to get that kid to at least their teens without having too much damage done to them, right? So I would think that kind of level of strategy planning is a very specific US thing because your density is so different, right? Yeah, it's not like it's like you're all of Europe, but it's still so sparse, right? That's
all of Europe is about the size of the US, which is pretty crazy when you consider the variety of culture in Europe compared to our country. It's a completely different playing field.
Yeah, which is and I think do you feel like there are many like-minded people like you where you live? Is it or is the South pretty much now? Is the South being replaced by a lot of blue types, or is it mainly non-Native Americans showing up with new views?
Sadly, I think Southern culture is almost completely eradicated at this point in terms of any real force that's going to continue on. I mean, some of the older folk, maybe the boomers, still maintain it to some degree, but in the millennials and Gen Xers, they've been basically totally homogenized. So I think, unfortunately, Southern culture is just going to kind of become a curiosity of history and not really something that continues into the future in any meaningful way, really. Which is unfortunate.
It's very sad because my missus is not very political, and we a year or two ago we ran into one of our local pubs we used a lot for years. Is we met this wonderful couple from Georgia, and they still had that southern kind of thing. And because she's a bit of a food person, they've maintained a good long relationship now because they exchange recipes, and she gets all these things she thinks is amazing, and it's all old traditional southern cooking. She's like, I don't think people made food like this, right? Right? And you look at that and you think that, and I look at them and say, well, we're lucky to have met this family and couple because there are not many of them left anymore, right? And when I speak to her, I get along well with his wife, and she says, oh, we've tried our hardest, but my kid now comes back, and her daughter's just gone to college and comes back going, Mommy, Daddy, were you participating in slavery?
Oh, jeez.
Right. No, but really, that's how much the indoctrination is. So,
Yeah,
so
well,
within one generation, they can take the children away from you, in a sense, right? They can take your kids away from one, right? And these are kind of, I'd call them traditionalist Southerners, but I would put them on the liberal side of that traditionalism. Does that make sense? They're proud to be Southerners. They're proud, but they would have been on the softer side of that. They're good Christian folk, right? For lack of a better word, they're good Christian Southerners, right? But they're
yeah.
not right. They're not gung ho. Their politics are fairly, on the right hand side of the Republican Party, but nothing terribly special. And literally, her daughter thinks she's complicit. She said the other day to me in an email, we write to each other, and she said, my Ralph, what is complicity? She keeps saying I'm complicit. What does
Oh,
she mean? You like words. What is complicit? What have I done to her? Why have I failed my daughter? I'm like, it's not your fault, Alison. It's not you. You haven't done anything. She's being indoctrinated, because the word complicit is straight neo-Marxist writing, right?
yes.
You're like, yeah, I mean, so that's how sad that is, right? So the Mason-Dixie line is no more, my friend. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's what's happening. I mean, you can still find pockets of this culture, but there's no one left to carry it forward into the future. And I think the case you mentioned there is just the perfect example of that. Like, it's inevitable that it's going to die off, because the only people who could have continued it on are just being subsumed into the system. So,
oh yeah, and there's another anecdote about the same family, because the husband was very upset because he had his father or his grandfather left him lots of memorabilia, and one of them had a Confederate flag, and he's not even a Confederate person. He just sees it as part of his heritage, so he considered himself a traditionalist, if anything else. And the daughter took it and destroyed it with her friends and took photographs and put it on Twitter or something.
hmm.
So that's
um,
really, really sad, isn't it? It's hard because this man wasn't even a Confederate. He just had something that his grandparents had left him. So it was an heirloom, right? But the daughter has been so programmed to think that she would take it away, and she's done something positive by purging it from her family. And that breaks my heart, right? Which is kind of like, so.
yeah, and I think that story is basically generally applicable to Southern millennials at this point.
Uh,
Let me share one more thing. I'll post it in the side chat. So, probably our most ace developer, I guess, on the Agora project actually made this nifty website called demographicsondisplay.co.uk. And what he did was he took government data and visualized it or spatialized it. And you might be interested in just checking it out or sharing it with people. It's
let me
it's a
share it
neat,
right now.
yeah, it's just a neat little website where you can view the demographic transitions in the UK over time, and you have a few options in terms of which year you're looking at, and what the demographic breakdown of parts of the country are. It's pretty interesting little application.
Okay, so this is the constituency. Because I clicked it, it changed the data here. Let me just scale this down one sec. Okay, right. So he's okay. So see, this is what I mean. There's lots of rendering views. So I don't know if you like. Sorry, guys in the chat. Do you like D3 and libraries like that, like D3 rendering and stuff? You can do lots of wonderful rendering of stuff. So this is exactly, yeah. And you know what? This is exactly how I look at. It's hard to explain to you. I just live and dream in a spatial map every day, mate. So, and this Hackney, this is the constituency there. Where me? So I'm over here. So there I go. There's Bethnal Green. So that's where I am. White 46%, white English 33%, Asians 40%. This is what you looked at the window. So is this part of the Agora thing, or was he?
This is just kind of a thing he did for fun, I guess, because he's a
Yeah.
lead hacker, I guess. He's in the
Yeah.
UK, actually, young guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, you
Yeah.
can like pick a year. It's really interesting when you start picking years in the options.
Where do I pick the year?
Over, up at the right, like if you go to map options,
I didn't see that right. He's color picker map options. So
there's lots of different ways he broke down the data, so you could just sort of visualize the change of the United Kingdom over time. It's pretty interesting. The earlier,
so that you can do the. I see what you mean, right? Yeah, absolutely. Let me show you something as well. While I've got you, you like this. So let me share my screen and give me a second, matey. I had no idea Charlemagne was a geek. I can't tell you how excited I am, my friend. So let's just, we're everywhere, aren't we? We just don't identify ourselves.
yeah.
I think it's almost like we need a Telegram server Discord for geeks only, but then we'll be accused of segregation or apartheid, or apartheid or something, my friend. So this is the demographic data of the United Kingdom, where each person is a dot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll show you London. I'll show you some of the myths. So a blue dot is a white person, a green dot's a black person, a red dot's a Asian person, meaning Asian now terms means Indian subcontinent, basically brownies. And if you look at this, here's the myth of segregation. Here's the myth of diversity as a strength. This is London. What's the first thing that streaks out at you, man?
Yeah, well, it's obviously self-segregated.
Yeah, I mean, just look at that. And this is where, so I live in this hipstery edge over here. And that's, you can see this is the heartland of the SJW elite. So the SJW elite are here, the literati over here. First thing you notice is they only live with white people, right? You see the Indian community over here who don't like the Muslim community of black people. So they run away from anything that's black first, and then they run away to anything from Muslims. Muslims and blacks seem to get along really well over here. And this is all the liberal whites. This is a full liberal white area. Like, so these are the liberal whites, and this is the SJW progressive whites. So when I go drinking stuff and I'm trolling, I'm in a mood, I go straight into the heart of the hipsterati white, right? So you can see anything to it. But now the person I was telling you about, if I then zoom out of the country, if I go to large areas that are very, very native, getting these people to wake up to this problem is insanely difficult. Even in the country of the scale of UK, it's very, very difficult to see this. Whereas if you go to the grooming towns, you hear of all the, you're no doubt aware of all the grooming in England, right?
Yes.
Of all the, see all these red dots here? These are all the old mill towns in Yorkshire, Manchester, around here. These correlate almost perfectly a density to all the grooming. So all the million over 1 to 2 million rapes, we think, in terms of number of rapes, all of them are here. It's just absurd, isn't it? It's literally almost like, from a geek point of view, like, okay, when that density hits X%. So I went to the latest one where was it? I think Rochdale, that area. So over here, you see this is where you see the predatorial pattern preying on white people. So literally, when you look at the grooming gap cases data, they just literally, you get a density pattern, they expand, they take this area over, and then they're predatorial. Right. And what happens? You get immediate white flirt, which is a shame because these are very historical towns. So people in England know what these towns, if I put some labels on, So put some labels on, that's Halifax I was talking about. So Halifax, right? All Rochdale, Bury, these are where all the grooming act happens. If I go into the cities that have fallen, so I go to, say, the second city of Birmingham, you can see that almost a microcosm of the pattern again, can't you? They just take over. One area is taken over, other areas taken over. You get flight, and then it's like, I mean, what can you say, man? Anyway, guys, I think we probably had a good little go having me, my friend. I don't want to conscious out. I'm terribly sorry about being late, by the way. That's not usually my thing, so I do apologize about that. And I'd love to have a chat again. I'll ping you on Twitter and stuff. If anyone has any questions in the chat, I don't do super chats or anything like that. If you have any questions for Charlemagne, please shoot them out in the chat and we can ask him. I know you have a lot of fans who are quite shy because a lot of people send me messages saying they're very excited you were coming on. So now you know the bad news, guys. Charlemagne's a geek, so you can unsubscribe from his channel straight away. Send him some literature, some philosophy and poetry, and never watch his videos again. So. Right, Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure.
With people if they want. Oh,
there's a link with Charlemagne. Sorry, let me get your link out there. I think I'll put the link in the description. Charlemagne's also on Twitter. Is that your Twitter ID, Charlemagne5? Or there you go. Jewel is always a star. He's right in there. So there's his channel, and he's also on Twitter. And is that just it? Is it just Twitter and YouTube, mate?
I mean, I'm on BitChute as well. I have a Gab account. I don't really use them. BitChute's kind of suspect. I mean, I'm on Discord as well, although I don't really use it anymore. But I mean, yeah, if you want to chat, I'm on Twitter. If you just add me, I'll probably answer your question.
There you go, guys.
Just a guy if you want.
So you've got him on Twitter, and if you want to know about the, if you put a comment, if you want to publicize anything about the Agora project or anything else, if you want to send me the data, I'll put in the links to this video. So if people want to learn more about your projects and stuff, they can do that as well. So,
yeah, let me just in the side chat.
Okay.
Website.
Questions in binary will only be answered in binary, Chris. So and the response will be encrypted with a 1 petabyte key. So it would take a while to type. Let me put this in here.
Yeah,
So
this is still a work in progress. That's kind of a preview, but eventually we'll be inviting more communities to get on this thing. I've gone around with talked to various people, trying to see if they're interested at all in this Discord alternative, and a lot of people are. So we'll see where it goes.
super. So wonderful. Thanks again very so much. And once more, I do apologize. I was racing and sweating across town, and the community is dead. No one would lend me a phone. So there we go. Thanks everyone in the chat and stuff. Hope you have a good evening. And remember, white pill a day keeps them all away. So
Yep.
you know what you have to do, guys. Take care, everyone. Bye.
All right.
Peace out, man.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for the chat. That was a lot of fun.
Hey, I'm gonna